Hey, I'm Steve Lee, and I'm a big fan of what Respawn managed to do with the Titanfall games. So I'm really happy to kick off my first developer interview talking to Jason McCord and Mackey McCandlish, two absolute veterans of the AAA FPS genre who played a big part in bringing it to life. In this part of our chat, I was keen to dig into the challenges that Respawn went through with both games, from starting a brand new studio in the middle of a huge lawsuit, months of game engine research and over a year of prototyping, and the endless design challenges of delivering both a multiplayer and single-player game where you give players a giant robot to play with. So this is why Making Titanfall was hard. I hope you find it interesting and stick around for more developer interviews in the future. Cheers.
Titanfall 1's E3 demo. Remember, it was a fracture, and you ran up to the Titan, and he says some stuff, and then you go up the road, and then it turns into this really big. It looks like really awesome gameplay, and it was scripted so hard, and everything in there was built for the first time for that demo, and none of us had played that game. And we took that video afterwards and said, this is what the game's supposed to be like. And everyone was like, oh.
Well, beyond
we made that.
Beyond that, you even got to play it, but you're playing against people in the background or people from Respawn playing the other.
Yeah.
Playing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was a real playable thing that was made, but it wasn't like other games where you take your level that's further along and you like finish it up and make it good for E3. It was like, wow. Build the game for E3 and then make what you made for E3.
I think that point you just made it's easy to miss. See, aside from that Medal of Honor demo, every game we made after that, we did not make an E3 specific demo. What we did was whatever was really far along, we did a cut, we sent it. Like COD 4, we just used the bog level. It's already worked. It's been in the can for a long time. We're taking it to E3 and they're just going to play it. And for even COD 2, we crunched a little bit at the end just to get D-Day ready, but it was the real playable thing. We didn't go back to that level to do whatever after. Like we got into a much better development rhythm where E3 was just where you showed something that was far along, not, hey, it's E3's coming up and we have nothing to show. Let's cram for it. Although it did help us move things along on Titanfall.
So yeah, Titanfall. So let me think. For me, I'm really curious about this in terms of how it started because I remember I've read a bit about it being a very tumultuous time for the studio. Just the whole, the name Respawn comes from, I assume, the drama that Respawn came out of in a way. Can you give a kind of summary of what that drama was, just for some context, without getting into anything too hairy? There was a lot of people from Infinity Ward moved on to
40 people.
Right.
And that was in the age of smaller teams. So that was a lot of the team. Almost all the engineers too. One, two.
I think we shipped Modern Warfare 2 with 80-something people. Is that right? So it's half the team.
Wow.
You started a company with a ton of people without tech or an IP and just say go. Oh, and by the way, we're in a lawsuit that's going to distract you half the week.
Right.
And you're not asking for the easy road at that point. So
right. And distracting in what? Again, maybe this is hard to talk about.
We would literally have lawyers come in to the studio, and 95% of the people that work there would go into a conference room and conduct a meeting about the lawsuit. Wow, and the other couple people that are there that were not in the lawsuit are just like, I don't know. I guess I don't know. I hope what they're talking about doesn't make the studio go under or something.
Unless winning is bad. I hope something. Yeah. I hope it ends someday.
Well, so how long did this go on for? How many of the first months of Titanfall was there lawsuit, or was it most of the project?
All of 2010, all of 2011, half of 2012.
Whoa, right. I see.
It was most of the project, yeah.
Right, Jesus. All right, I feel like I'm bringing back trauma.
Once it was over, the founder and game director retired to a different state and said, "You guys got this one."
Right, I see. And was that any? Let me think. I'm also wondering about where the dropping of the single player came from. Was that? I assume that wasn't related in any way.
But it was the lawsuit. But it's like, again, so many people with this expectation, you're going to keep working the way you used to work, but then not having the tech or tools or IP to just do that right away. So, like you were mentioning, affecting cause, that was. I mean, it wasn't working, but that was envisioned and designed for Titanfall 1. But then, hey, we can't actually make it, so let's backburner that and ship a team deathmatch and then see what happens.
Right. So you had, that idea was already there for Titanfall 1. Wow, that's cool.
That's my favorite pitch for Titanfall 1 levels was that one.
No, totally. It was super cool. And okay, so that makes me think about the whole action blocking thing. So Jake Keating was there in the Titanfall 1 days?
Yeah, he was there for Modern Warfare 2 and COD 4. He was...
Oh, right, okay.
There for
I see. Okay, it's another long time. Okay, cool. So, yeah, the whole action block thing makes, again, it sounds like a level designer's dream in the sense of, like, except, I suppose, without the tools. Like you say, I'm guessing there was a long tool ramp-up. Starting from scratch?
Dude, one of my nightmares, it's almost like, you know how you have the nightmare where you wake up and you're unprepared and you can't deliver whatever you need to. Usually you're at school or something. Working on Asylum with McCord at Respawn,
trying to make that random good. Titanfall 1 single player map that never
trying to make that single player map good, and I'm like, I don't have any of the tech I used to have. I don't have the replay system where I can rewind time and study the beats and get into the AI's head. This is like,
and that was so frustrating for me because I have a level that's like not like done, but I've got all these, the way that we've described that the way Mackey and I work, and I've got places where I'm like, okay, I think there's lots of. It's like an abandoned asylum, and it's all overgrown, and it's filled with like creatures and stuff. This is kind of where the prowlers from Titanfall were going to be, and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I had all these moments in mind, and I was like, describing them to inspire Mackey, and like, he was like, "I'm just trying to make a guy shoot you from this balcony." And it was like so frustrating. He was frustrated, and I was frustrated that it wasn't coming together.
Right. Because you literally starting from scratch with it was Source, right?
Source.
No. It was Portal 2. We actually played. We actually set up. We were like, hey, these portals are cool. Let's play deathmatch this way. And we're running around playing deathmatch with portals in a very relevant recently way.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Do you remember that? We're shooting rockets through the portals to hit each other.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking about how. When we got there, we didn't know that we were going to use Source, and we did this giant push to go figure out what engines that we wanted to use, and everybody split off and picked different engines and went and did experiments.
Right.
And whoever like Mackey worked on some Source stuff and made this cool level where this big pyramid came in, kind of came out of the ground and played music, and all these AI came, and it was just like this amazing thing. And for a little mod thing that he put together quick. And then some other people built, I was working in Crisis and I built like a bridge or something. Like it was like, this is hard. These tools are weird. And then kind of out of left field, I don't remember who had the connection to Ted Price. I don't know, Vince or somebody's friends with Insomniac guys. And they were like, you can have Ratchet and Clank, the Ratchet and Clank engine on the PlayStation 3.
Ratchet and Clank Future 2 or something.
Futures 2, yeah. You can have that engine for free. And we were like, well, okay. And so everyone put effort into that for a long time, but it didn't have any first-person shooter support. So, I mean, the amount of nothing that we're trying to make a game with.
And due to for legal reasons, they couldn't actually give us the assets. So it was basically an engine with no real explanation, at least with Source and with previous games, we had the previous games. Like we started Call of Duty with Wolfenstein, whatever that Wolfenstein was at the time. And we had those assets to at least understand the engine we were working with,
Yeah. That sounds so how I'm trying to think how many months was it into Titanfall's development that it felt like when you actually found what Titanfall was. Like I think I read that. I mean, how did Titanfall start out as like how can we build from Call of Duty? Where was the starting point creatively?
It was like we had these phrases like no shooter for old men. Like how can we make a shooter for us old, at the time 30 something or whatever's, that
Right.
maybe aren't so Twitch focused, which eventually did make it into the game with like the smart pistol.
I mean, after we made the twitchiest first-person shooter ever known to man, but
I mean,
we
it
did
was
have a smart
a
pistol.
shooter as it was.
Yeah, I think I read, that was it. I read about how wasn't there a goal to try and figure out how to extend the player's lifespan, basically, and that kind of thing. And that was
those things.
like protects. Were Titans always so massive? Were they always giant robots, or was it like a?
I think so. Yeah, the scale was a big.
There was a period of like trying to find the right scale, but at that time we didn't know it was going to be Titans and pilots. We were trying a lot of different things. It's like, let's try letting you control a drone from above in space. Let's try letting you play as like a squad of guys. So if one dies, you get to play as the other ones. And all of these, the Space Ninja and the giant robot, they were all battling it out in a battlefield. Yeah. That was, right. So we kind of cast this wider net before we started trimming back to the two we kept, and then we put them together and you had a Titan and a pilot.
Right.
But that whole process really that was mostly the one with all the multiplayer happening at the same time. That was as late as late 2011.
Right.
That was that prototype.
Is that like over a year into it? How long?
That's 2 years. That's almost 2 years in. And we had used Source, and we had prototype wall running. We're like, this is fun. We were running around in Half-Life 2 missions doing wall running, skipping their sequences and breaking their scripting. And we're like, it's pretty cool. And then we went and then used Ratchet for a while. And we're like, man, we can't even do anything. Remember back in the day when we did wall running so fast? Should we go back to that one? And eventually went back. And then we did that multiplayer prototype. But we also did a crazy single player. Yeah, after that, we did a single player prototype that took the first half of 2012. And it was stealthy, and it had the smart pistol. And there's videos of this stuff online, as far as I know. And,
that was Batman with guns was what we called that combat loop. I remember building those missions. It was like you're supposed to get up to the perch and see your scenario out in front of you and kind of think about your options, but you couldn't really engage from up there, right? You had a smart pistol that had limited range, and you could see people behind cover with their skeletons, so they were always kind of patrolling behind cover. So you had to jump down and start it.
Right.
It was very like, hey, Batman came out and was cool.
Right.
What's cool lately, and not really that inspired. And it made us kind of realize, we're not really going to ship a whole single player game at the level we're used to in this time frame. So, and at the same time, that summer of 2012, the lawsuit finishes, the game director retires, and it's like, we need to hone this down. And we're like, okay, it's the pilots, the Titans, and they're going to do team deathmatch. Let's work the rest of 2012 to try to get not even playable, but just a run through that looks like it would look. So we had Steve Fukuda took over as game director. He had 20 beats or whatever. And so you're just playing through it was the GPMM demo for one of EA's events. And you're just playing through all these sequences. It started with a character going, McCord, come run up the hill. Remember there was that's what I was talking about earlier, the
E3 demo.
Yeah. And it wasn't really playable, but it let you could imagine what all those beats would be. It had the data knife, and it had a bunch of getting in and out of the Titan, the ejecting.
Rodeo to Titan.
So once we finished that, we had a demo that you could imagine what the game would be. And we were able to make that into a playable enough game demo in time for E3, which would have been 2013.
So that was about 2 years in.
Yeah. So 2013, whenever E3 was in this early summer, it took us those 6 months to go from that GPMM demo to that playable version. We didn't even have shields on the Titan until just before E3. We were still trying to solve how to make the durability right for Titans.
Right. Yeah, because think about it, because that was a big kind of your first big project where it was a new franchise basically for a team that has worked on Call of Duty games and Medal of Honor for a really long time. That must have been. Was it a fun time, or was it apart from the lawsuit stuff? Was it fun to be that in such a big open space of what can we do for the first time in a while, or was it kind of aside from the lawsuit being stressful? How did that feel as a beginning of a project? Was it?
I thought it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of. It was building a universe that had so many I think Mackey said this one time, and it stuck with me, is that the design space of Titanfall was basically limitless. Like just the universe and that was created, we could pretty much make anything work. Sci-fi, tech, and you can pretty much go anywhere from there. And so it was just fun to dream up stuff and make stuff. The tech was tough. The lawsuit was tough. We had sort of a cruddy building, but for a while, but like it seemed like anything goes at that point. Somebody made something cool. It was like, well, let's figure out how to get that in the game. And so
that's super cool. And to me, it's funny how coming to it as a player, I remember when it was first announced and kind of shown in trailers and stuff, I was like, oh, that's got everything. Like to me, it was like Call of Duty plus the mobility plus the Titans plus the whole jump ship thing. I love that you made a thing of like, oh, what if we actually made the jump ship chase thing a gameplay thing? It feels like we've seen it in movies and all this kind of stuff, and that you integrated that into a kind of the core of a team deathmatch experience. I thought was super cool, and so it feels so natural the way you executed it. That it's interesting to hear about drama and complication along the way, because it feels so nicely rounded off. The way it was delivered.
Yeah, the things that we were talking about Call of Duty animated sequences and letting the player do the thing instead of animating it. I feel like Titanfall 1 was really sort of the team's best effort at expressing that in all the mechanics. Like that game is so cinematic, but everything is player activated.
The player's doing the cinematic stuff.
I look where I want to call on my Titan. I hit the button. Titan comes down, slams down in front of me in the most cinematic thing ever. Yeah. You go get into it. He picks you up and puts you in. And like everything that you're doing is like a lot of those things are initiating animations, but you're like, you're the player's actually doing all of those things instead of...
No, totally. And you got like the coolest version of all those verbs, like even like ejecting from a Titan that is about to blow up. You're propelled miles into the air.
And you have full control once you get up there, and you can shoot and you can double jump.
And you can land on another Titan and rodeo it and all this kind of stuff. It's just like, you got all the cool verbs into a system where they all work together. It's like, really impressive.
Is this the point where it's bragging to ask you guys who you think scripted those mechanics?
Maybe he's here. Maybe he's... Nice. Well, so what does that mean? It's scripting those mechanics in Source. How?
That's the thing. That's the power of the language we had. I'll give you a really good example. Like the Titanfall mechanic where the Titan comes in. I created it in script, and it. What happened was. There were edge cases that it didn't handle well, and the Titan would end up in the wrong place. And the bugs were like really hard to fix. And you'd fix one, and another would emerge. And this happened to Grenier too with the Smart Pistol. He created in script, and it almost worked, but didn't quite. And in both those cases, then an engineer had to come in at the 11th hour and do like a little bit of feature work to basically get it to the completion. But it was one of those cases of like scripter initiated 95% developed in script. And then I don't want to take anything away from the engineers basically had to come in and save our ass at the very end to make it actually work properly, performantly, et cetera, et cetera.
All right.
So there was a lot of that. There was a lot of working closely with engineers to develop the technology to have a moment that works properly in first and third person at the same time. So you could get in that Titan and still be occupying the right space and have a first person animation and a third person animation play at the same time on the same player. That was a huge challenge with that game that we did. And that's what made it possible to make those mechanics, and they're totally scripted mechanics. So in probably a lot of other games, maybe you're getting in a car in a battlefield or whatever, that's probably a lot of code is exposing this thing and that thing, you're plugging some stuff in. These are scripted mechanics in Titanfall. And when Haggerty went and made it so that, for example, the Titanfall, to address those bugs, he just added a new script command that would return points in an arc of blah, 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 and then used it in the script to finish the feature. So they're very, and even the original, like Rodeo is an example, where the original Rodeo prototypes were created entirely in script, but they weren't client perform. They weren't client predicted properly. So if you were to play them over the internet, you would have been like sucked onto the Titan, out of sync, blah blah blah. And then once you're on the Titan, you're in full control. You can turn within an arc. You're really shooting your gun. The bullets are really interacting with the brain of the Titan. But it required then an engineering layer to take the concepts expressed there and then add a new way to do that motion in a predicted way, and then the scripter going back and hooking it all through it.
So did you do a lot of systems work in general, like moving away from level design in that early stage of the game?
Oh yeah, I mean, when I was level designed to get sort of into the industry and my total conversions and mods, but once I was in, I did build a few levels here and there, and I did design a couple through the Call of Duty ages, but I was more the person that would jump. Me and Chad and Mo and some of the other guys were like whatever big, bulky, meaty scripting targets really need a scripter on them early to prove out what this game is going to do differently than the previous games. Well, the rest of the designers would say that again.
I said Mackey is a powerful scripter. Him and Chad Grenier, and I mean, there's a couple other guys too, but those guys are like the guys that did a lot of the heavy lifting.
Right. And when
I got to say, it's appropriate time to point out that I think McCord would have a fair claim to being the best level designer that's ever
in the world.
Boom.
That's a
first.
I think I can't. I mean, there's probably a couple others that would be a little bit of a competition, but I think it would be a fair claim.
And how would you define?
And imagine just being a waiter or some shit. And fortunately, there was an ad in a magazine so that he could actually do his life's work.
I'm curious, how would you qualify that? Like when you say, like,
because
what is best?
McCord he can just lay out so much geo so fast, and it's good and it's flexible. When we were making Apex, it's like there were people making levels, but then once McCord stepped in, within like 6 weeks, now we actually have a vision for what Kings Canyon is going to be, and we can play it. Like, it's the combination of the speed, the sensibility. He did single player, he did multiplayer, both. That's hard to be good in both areas. Yeah, it's just speed and quality. And McCord will also he'll take the level so far along artistically that you could be there in an art review and they're not sure, was this done by the artists or McCord? Do we need to change it? I don't know. It's pretty good, and time clock's ticking. Maybe we should leave McCord's stuff and move on to the next thing. Whereas when I did the lighting for One Shot, One Kill, one day I came in and Tatsu had relit the whole thing, and he didn't even realize I had tried. So,
okay, so, that's cool. It's great to have the greatest level designer in Call of Duty history.
Oh, well, no, that absolutely is not
I think it'd be a legit claim. I'd be curious to hear who else.
You did a very good job of not blushing there, Jason. Good job.
There's my modesty. I'm not modest at all, so I'm just laughing it up.
Nice,
but also thank you.
Okay, so speaking of like figuring level design, like getting those layouts done and figuring out what the layout should be, I was curious, like how long did that take to figure out what level design in Titanfall meant, and what's the formula as such? Like for me, the distinctive thing about it is the dual layer thing, where you've kind of got a Call of Duty map with added verticality, but you've also got you've essentially, in my head, you've got like Titans playing Counter-Strike in terms of the layout. You got these kind of choke points that Titans will meet up at. How long was that a nightmare to figure that out, or was that did it feel quite intuitive? But
are we talking about the single player or multiplayer? Just for
I'm thinking multiplayer maps in, let's say, Titanfall 1, just figuring out the meat and potatoes of how you do a Titanfall map. How Titans basically changed the dynamics of level design for that game.
I don't think we ever figured it out. 2 games, 2.5 games. Apex is similar, and it's. I've been quoted internally as saying it's an unsolvable problem. Like those two spaces living together, fighting each other. It's 2 different games playing at the same time. Really 4 different games if you think about pilot versus pilot, Titan versus Titan, and then the other.
Yeah.
We called them the 4 food groups.
Yeah.
That was that problem space.
Right.
Yeah, so you have the 4 quadrant of the gameplay that can happen, and you're trying to make the map work for all of those types of games at the same time, randomly at any time. Because You eject from your Titan middle of the match, and now you could fight another pilot indoors, or across a huge building, or a robot comes up and blasts you with a rocket, and it's just like you can't really predict what's going to happen. So you're trying to control the chaos with the Geo at all. You know.
I want to share. I want to share. We shipped Titanfall, and we were having that. I always enjoyed Titanfall up to the point where all the Titans came in, and then you died, and then it got so chaotic, the chaos would happen. And I was watching. I don't watch much hockey, but I was watching a hockey game, and there was a power play. One player was taken off the field. Then the remaining players, they have this big advantage, and they press and they try to get a goal. And I'm thinking, wow, take one player off the field in hockey, and it's a massively different game strategically. In Titanfall, sometimes there's 4 Titans, sometimes there's 1, sometimes there's whatever. You're never going to be able to make a strategy out of that. You're just it's like a war. You're just trying to live to the next moment.
And you're trying to and every map has to support several game modes, right, as well. So that, like, did you have? I can't remember. Were they all? Did every map support every game mode?
They didn't not about 100%, but there were some that were better for CTF, but they were all pretty much. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, they were meant to work with attrition.
I think that I remember Jeff Smith being the level designer that, I mean, he worked with him at Infinity Ward, and then he started Respawn with us, and he's always been the guy that I look to as like the godfather of making COD maps. Like, this guy is brilliant at making COD maps. He made Crash and all these iconic COD maps. So, he gets to work on solving Titanfall Geo and comes up with a lot of really smart rules or guidelines, And one of those that I remember latching onto was that he basically always started with hardpoint first, the 3 capture points,
right?
Because then you got it like that. If that's not going to work randomly, you start with that. You kind of have your 3 points, and then you can build team deathmatch around that, and then you can usually build CTF around 2 points, and you can kind of make other things work,
right?
And so that's the one that I remember.
Well, now that you got me thinking, you're reactivating my memory. I remember how frustrating it was on the design side that we couldn't really achieve that sort of golden standard of 3 lanes that was popularized by Counter-Strike because of the wall running above the lanes and the madness that would ensue. So there was always like that. There was always an effort to try to recapture the flow a little bit from Call of Duty, but it was directly combated by the mechanics that made the game different enough to be worth playing in the first place.
It's interesting to hear that you feel that you never solved it, because again, as a player, it feels like I went back to Titanfall 2 recently, and I remember there's a map that I played a lot where it's kind of it's among canyons. It's kind of a bit more, I think, circular, and it's all canyons. And it struck me how like that was a really different kind of map to all the other maps. And I saw it in terms of like, oh, they've figured out how to make this work in all kinds of maps. It's interesting to hear that you feel like...
It's the opposite. It's every map is trying to solve the game again.
Yeah, it's interesting. Huh.
Like, Homestead is a map that I made in Titanfall 2, and it's a big open field. And I remember thinking like, oh, I think I've solved it. You basically give tons of room for Titans to play, and you put the pilots on little islands that are kind of like away from Titan activity unless they get to the edge. So you get really clear, clean pilot versus pilot fighting. And then they have to transition through wall running and sort of dangerous transitions across Titan territory to other pilot zones where they can push up and capture a building or whatever the objective is. And it basically worked like that, but like feedback was just as split as anything else. Half the people didn't like it. Probably more than half the people didn't like it.
Right.
War Games is another map that I made, and that was just like, fuck it, I'm just going to make the most wall running friendly map you can make, and just Titans will just live in there, and I don't care about them. And so every map was just trying to do something totally different, and to the hope that maybe one of them is like, oh, this is actually the solve.
Right. So was there never a map that was
wrong end of the equation?
Was there never a map that was the most popular one? Like there wasn't a like Dust for Counter-Strike.
I mean, Angel City is.
Right. Okay.
Angel City is, and that was one of Jeff's maps, and it was one of the first ones that was made for Titanfall 1.
Okay.
And that kind of has everything, sort of in equal amounts. Lots of wall running, lots of height, lots of room for Titans. 3 lanes, basically.
Right.
Cool. we rolled into, gosh, I spent most of 2015 trying to solve this for single player and really trying to come up with a set of like test levels that would prove you being able to get in and out of your Titan when you wanted to and pick the right times to fight. And we didn't ship any levels like that. In the end of the day, we just went with the map is going to make you get out of the Titan and you're going to do pilot for a while. And then the map is going to make you get back in the Titan to progress. And that was the only, we had to go Master Blaster style to solve it. But the clock's ticking, when the game is shipping. If you don't solve the problem by a certain time, you got to fall back and do what you got to do. I mean, on Call of Duty 2, when we started that game, it was going to be a non-linear Call of Duty. All of the levels were non-linear. The prototype was, first playable was, but it wasn't really working. So towards the end, when we're getting closer to E3 of the shipping year, we go, make these linear, go through each level and make them linear. And like a couple bits of non-linear kind of peek through in a couple different levels. But once you're getting within a certain range of shipping, it's time to make it work no matter what.
Yeah. And that, certainly, I always feel like...
If you're asking why it's hard, it's like, I'll tell you why it was hard. And it's hard because it's a symmetric difference, not a truly asymmetric difference. You're not a choice between apples and oranges. You're a choice between like one of the little blueberries and like one of those big blueberries. And the big blueberry is like better in almost every circumstance. So, and there's no way to reconcile dying, and it's just like you're giving me PTSD here. So,
so I'm curious with the whole. Let me think. Titanfall 1 started off single player and multiplayer, but then became fully multiplayer. Titanfall 2, you decided to do a campaign. But then with Titanfall 1 already having shipped as a multiplayer game, I don't know, can you recall any particular challenges that were like, oh man, we've got to stay consistent, right, to some degree with the multiplayer game? Were there any kind of particular challenges there, or did the story-driven nature kind of free you up to do what you like, maybe? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? Were there?
I remember Steve just being very confident that this was a buddy movie that we were making,
right.
A boy and his Titan. And that was, I don't know how long it took to get to that realization. But once it was during action blocks. It was like early on, it was like, go make action blocks around you and your Titan and the things that you can do together, how you can get through the levels, cool stuff you can do together. And
right.
We're going to build a relationship with these guys. And then, basically Steve and Manny, the writer, went and solved that while we made levels. So.
Right, and it would always be a very BT would be very controlled and scripted and like a character rather than a mechanic,
We did try to... Titanfall 2 started with the refrain of making Titanfall more accessible, and that eventually led to the wall running slower, the Titans are slower, stuff like that. The rodeo is different, and it was it was kind of frustrating to try to accomplish. And I think it did make, you're talking about going from Titanfall 1 to 2. I think it did make the franchise maybe a little more, you got Titanfall 1 fans, you got Titanfall 2 fans from that.
Yeah.
And
Titanfall 1's a lot more cracked out.
Sorry, what was that, Jason?
Titanfall 1's more cracked out. Like straight up, it's just faster and harder to play.
Right. And you're comparing the multiplayer games here. Are you saying Titanfall 2's multiplayer was slower? Is it really? Okay,
it was very divisive at launch, because we did this tech test first, which didn't even have attrition, and the players noticed that we sped it up a little from that tech test, but the players that were really hardcore Titanfall players rejected that from the jump. It reminds me a little bit of Street Fighter 3 being slower, and the Street Fighter players now they pick which one is their favorite.
Right.
But I think that challenge of really making that game accessible, again, we're solving the wrong side of the equation. The thing that makes it so hard to make accessible is that through one attrition match, you're supposed to play a giant robot that plays one way and play a wimpier wall runner that plays a different way. And it's requires a very select human that really wants to be going back and forth and engage in that chaos and breathe in the chaos for extended periods of time.
It's just a reactionary game loop is all it is, right? It's the only way you can play that game is just to be able to react to what just happened to you faster than the other person can react.
Okay.
The strategy is not. I mean, I'm probably gonna get destroyed
The
by
thing you remind
Titanfall
me of,
fans.
McCord, is that the in Titanfall we went from Titanfall. This is this really good answer for your earlier question. We had sort of a create a class system. Pick your gun, and everybody would just pick the machine gun and the rockets, the cluster, whatever. And because it handled most situations. So for Titanfall 2, we went with character-based Titans, where the Titan has a name, it even has a sex, and it has a personality, and has a specific loadout. And this was an attempt to reduce the chaos. So the moment you saw the Titan, you'd know what it had, but you could also plan and game around it. Like we could make a Titan have a really slow gun, get away from the machine gun, because we'd give it some other powers to balance it out. And this was all towards the goal of kind of reducing that chaos, increasing the flash read and the value of the flash read. And the cool part is, by kind of going up against such a hard problem, we gained a bunch of skills that we expressed into Apex when we made a character-based multiplayer. Like we basically did the super impossible version first, and then set ourselves up to go do something actually manageable, where all the characters, the only difference is they have slightly different sizes. But for the most part, the characters are far more symmetric against each other, which lets makes the character job a lot easier. So it wasn't a waste of time by any stretch, but it was the solutions we were using were never going to solve that core problem. So
with a Call of Duty campaign or a Titanfall campaign, was it very much like, okay, we've got these cool ideas for missions and now we'll write a story to make that fit? Or was there ever was it always stop mission first, basically?
This was sometimes divisive in the team, but yeah, we would pitch a lot of mission ideas, design missions, and the story would be being developed in parallel. And it was on Titanfall 2, I would always push to hold off on really locking in the order of the levels until the levels each had really started to find its voice before, which drove Steve crazy on the story side, trying to make the story then make sense. Like, where's Time Shift going to go in the order was a story nightmare, but it's like it needs to be the level order that is the right time for that mechanic to jump out, right? It's where, if you think of it more like a music album, where does this track need to go to make the album great, regardless of the story of the album? So it was kind of like a little bit of a internal. A good example is like Call of Duty 4. We had all these missions, the desert missions, and there was a point where we realized that when we played them in sequence, it just wasn't that overall feel. The story might have been correct, but had been written, but the overall feel wasn't right. So that's when we realized we needed to make a new set of missions, and then eventually realized they should be interleaved, going back and forth between them to get a different feeling, a different pace, a different tone. And that wasn't because the story needed that to happen. It was in a response to just playing it and feeling it. And what is the pacing of this game? I think you mentioned something earlier about that. The sense of agency. You can take away that agency a bit, like I'll look it up, as long as you're surrounding it by the right pieces that you feel like the negative space of the previous level's agency. And just to riff for just a second more on this, we always felt like, yeah, it's one big game, but each designer, when they go to own that level, they're almost making their own little game there. It's like a collection of games that each of the designer really wants to play. And then it's the sort of overall job to sew them up and find a story that's being developed in parallel to make it make sense and help each level feel like it's at the right place. So
I remember Mackey and I going through a little pass at the end of Titanfall 2 and being like, notice here, okay, we've got most of the levels are in a good order now, but if you play through the game, we suddenly ask you to just wall run like a pro here, and we haven't done enough training because we didn't plan where's all the wall run build up for the game. So we did have to go back and fit, and Mackey was like, where can we add some more, just stitch in a wall running section that's not as hard. Right. And so in some of the old, or some of the level,
it was in Boomtown, I think.
I forget what Boomtown was called. The
one that built itself.
Yeah, right. We would have just some extra stretches of wall running that were just added in really late. The designer was like, "You want me to do what? Build in some Just push that geo
To your
over.
point, it was like it was driven by pacing and gameplay, not the narrative itself.
Right.
If you try to make the game the slave to the narrative, I think that's the wrong reason to be. It goes back to that whole movie verse game part.
Right.
Yeah.
And even because I assume with, like, for example, you've got a story arc with BT's relationship to the player, right? But I assume even that's more malleable in the sense that even if you need to reorder things a bit to make the experience stronger, you can kind of redo it's probably cheaper and more flexible to redo dialogue to make it fit the new sequence, I assume. And like you say, the experience comes first. That makes sense.
Yeah, dialogue is often done really late too, or it's done with temp VO first. So when you record the real dialogue, you've had time to sit on it for a while, and you have a chance to change.
I mean, you get some stuff that I think is sloppy. You know, like the whole ending of Beacon, the level that I worked on. It's like
that's what I was thinking.
Just goes to a cutscene, and then you're like you can't really move around, and you're in BT's holding you or something. I forget, and Sarah's talking to you, and it's like you have no agency over anything. You're just watching some people talk, and it's a bunch of exposition, and it's like that is not something we're proud of. But
I scripted that. I'll admit I scripted
that. We did. No, it was very late, right? It was
like, for the good parts, I got to take credit for that part too.
It was very late, and there was a beat of the story that the level didn't cover, and we were just like, well, we just got to throw something in there and move on with our life.
Oh no!
Do you remember the end? Remember there was like a Titan D-Day where you're in a Titan and you're blasting through the whole way. I don't know if you remember how that level ended, but I scripted the end of that one too, and that was also not a point of pride.
There was a whole design where you're supposed to rush the ship and everything, and I think you get to the end of the runway and it's just like takes your camera and shows you them leaving.
But do you feel like did players pick up on this stuff? Do you think? Like, is it because I think there's a lot of it takes sometimes good decisions are judging like what players won't notice, like because when you cut stuff often on the team, it's like, oh man, I can't believe we're cutting this thing, we've worked on it for ages. But if the players never knew that it even existed, like maybe it's often the right cut, right? Did you ever get have people talked about those sections that you're not proud of being like
in retrospect though, I think we were always culturally, especially Steve and I, very against cinematics, and a cinematic would have been a better ending to Beacon than what I scripted, where the player's the camera and it's all awkward and the view's getting kind of corkscrew, and it's like some things really should have been cinematic, and we just didn't. We're like, I think we felt like it would be better to ship a bad sequence than to invest in the energy of getting good at cinematics and then have the cinematics start replacing all these other parts in the game that should not be cinematics. So it's better to keep the whatever the monster in Pandora's box than to open it and follow what became of Call of Duty after we stopped making them.
So many devs on the team were like, want to make load screen videos, and I remember Steve and Mackey just being like, no, we're going to do images and it's going to be a blurb of text, and then we're going to just carry on because that's not important and that is a lot of work.
Right. Yeah.
We lost a lot of players between the sewers and the escaping affecting cause. And that we actually got this thing back that showed us which Xbox achievements they got, so we could see where there was a bigger drop off than elsewhere. So I think just from a pacing standpoint, the sewer level ended up being we go from the training kind of in the wilds level into the sewer level. That was just a little too long. The gamer had to trust us. Time shift is coming, blah, blah, blah. But they don't know that. It's just a little too long. And we lost in terms of players leaving the game. You want a lot of your players to finish the game. And we were always happy that our Call of Duty games even achieved like a 50% plus of players actually playing all the way through, which is rare for a single player game, even though the game is shorter. But I would give myself that feedback before any of the minutia about the sequences not being what they could have been. So,
right. No, like I say, I suspect it's a lot of the things you're talking about where you kind of we could have done it this way. It's like you probably made the right choices in the way you did it, in the situation you were in. But cool, that was super super interesting. Now there's a lot in there that was like both cool to hear, but also some of it really surprising in terms of like your process on Modern Warfare games and stuff. Cheers for talking. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Yeah.
These are fun, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for inviting us in.
Yeah, cool.
Good to see you, Mackey.
Good to see you too.